The team has two objectives for today's webinar. One, identify assessment writing practices and resources. And two, explore assessment settings and accommodation tools. And this will be the agenda that we will follow today. We will review the feedback cycle, review best practices for assessment writing, and we will review test settings and proctoring options. And with that, I would like to send it over to Jeremy to get us started. Jeremy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Armando. To get us kicked off, we'll do kind of a little icebreaker question. Shouldn't take just but a couple seconds. We are a small but mighty crowd, so I want each of you to try to drop an answer into the chat just so we can get a feel for the crowd today. High school football season is in full swing, well underway. How do you typically show your school spirit? Is it A, with spirit weeks, B, game day themes, C, pep rallies, D, other? If it is other, maybe drop a couple of words to let us know what it might be, or maybe you have a combo of answers. I've got a D, a B, an A, don't watch football, C, all of the above, D, all of the above, I like that, several C's. Very cool. D, other, go to the game. I really love that option. My favorites are especially when the weather starts to get a little cooler. You got to have the blankets and all that fun stuff. So awesome. Thank y'all for dropping some of that in there. Let's get rocking and rolling with why we're actually here today. I'm really excited about this topic. This is topic 1 in a 4-part assessment series. And this first topic is going to be very high level about some of the basics about getting your assessment program kind of reviewed or implemented. And then we're going to get into some nitty gritty in parts 2, 3, and 4 with very specific examples on certain things you can do with assessment and assessment practices. So like Armando mentioned, we're going to talk about assessments across a pretty broad spectrum of practice. We're going to start with some general philosophy about assessments and their role in the feedback cycle, and then move into some larger topics about things that you can do in your district to execute a solid assessment plan or an assessment program. Some of you in here may already have a great assessment program in your district. However, you might find some good tidbits today about things to review and address in your existing programs. So stay tuned throughout for good tips, but also a chance to reinforce what you may already be doing. So first, let's talk a little bit about the design program at a really high level. So where do we start? The first step in any assessment cycle is to design a comprehensive assessment program. For many of you, this won't be a ground-up design, as you've already got one, but more of a revisit. The steps are similar, but you have a leg up compared to people that are starting from the ground up with an already established system that just needs potential revision. Note that this process is not done in Aware. This is done outside of our software. This is a step that must be taken with the appropriate stakeholders in your district. So gather any curriculum leaders, teachers, school administrators, other experts in your district community. If you're lucky enough to have a university or college campus in your town, maybe reach out to the Department of Education and see if they have experts they'd be willing to lend. Anyone that knows assessment well, bring them into the conversation. Take a deep dive into defining what assessment should look like as a process, not necessarily what the assessment should look like, but what should assessment look like as a process at the district level, at the school level, and at the classroom level. Listen to all of the input about it because there all tends to be, from time to time, over time, a drift in practice. Sometimes you align things really well, you don't address it for a couple of years, and then things can begin to skew or shift. Maybe that skew or shift is on purpose, maybe it's not. So take all of that feedback and ask yourselves questions about your alignment across all of your schools. If you're a large enough district to have maybe several elementary campuses, middle schools, or high schools, should they all follow the same school expectations? How does formative assessment tie into this process? Is each teacher afforded the opportunity to assess things themselves? Are all summatives the same across all schools? Research into some of these practices by Hattie, Dufour, and other education titans can be looked up and referenced and given to your teachers. We won't spend a ton of time in digging up that now, but you should be readily able to find it with some quick Googling. Common formative assessments as a practice here help align our conversations that occur in settings like PLCs, campus data reviews, and even district level evaluation of student performance. So how does all of that fit into your program? Once these things are pegged, where do you actually stand with assessment practices now across your entire district? Find the gaps and develop a plan accordingly. Now, I don't have all of those questions listed out here, but like Armando mentioned, you'll be getting this recording, so you get the chance to kind of review some of that after you get that. So you might be asking yourself, Jeremy, the school year has already started. Isn't it a little late to be asking these questions and doing this? Absolutely not. Start the process now, have these conversations now, and begin what could be a multi-year process of refining your assessment program. Starting now can generate plans that you can enact around maybe benchmark season this year, semester testing time, or at the start of next semester. There's never a bad time to refine practice as long as it's approached logically with appropriate feedback and is balanced with other stressors on educators' plates. If you find you start in an evaluation now of your district-wide assessment program and you identify a tweak, remember what stressors are on educators' plates. Any change you make mid-year, try to identify something you can take off of the teacher's plates before you implement a change. A big piece of a comprehensive assessment program are the small steps that need to be taken in the classroom to make each stage as effective and as efficient as possible. Explore all of these aspects in your conversations while you're evaluating your assessment program for design and refining your assessments. You look at a test. We took a test. We've looked at it. Now, what do we do? That's a really big driving question for what's going on. And really, it's a part of this feedback cycle where we embed post-assessment activities. First, we tend to start, and this is where the asterisk is on our cycle here, where maybe the students take a test and aware. Then the teachers need to go and analyze that test using quick views. What are we noticing? How did the students perform? What concerns are there? What views and quick views should we look at and when? Are there quick views that you'd like to make and save and share as district views as part of a set of common practices and expectations? We're going to take a much deeper dive into the quick views aspect of this in part 2 of our webinar series in a couple of weeks. So make sure you come and attend that if that piques your interest. But the short of this is look at quick views and train your people. Make sure you and your people are asking the right questions after the data is available. Single test analysis is a feature in Aware Premium that if you're not with Aware Premium, that we're also going to take a dive into during the next webinar in the series. But keep in mind, each piece of the series is not going to focus solely on premium. You'll get good practices whether you're a premium customer or not. Now, often the feedback cycle pauses or even stops after analysis in many districts. You took the time to look at the data, you found some gaps, but then you didn't take action. So what do you need to do next? Here, the next step in the cycle is to engage the students, perhaps in reflection. You need to prompt the students with reflection questions. Get them to think about how they'd like the teacher to help the student focus not only on what they know or don't know, but how they feel about the content, about the assessment, about how they learn, what they identify as their strengths and their own weaknesses, and what skills do they want to focus on and want to improve. Gather that feedback from the students and use it to inform your next steps. Continuing in the cycle, after looking at the data and after getting the students to engage in reflection, teachers tend to group their students based on what they've learned from both the data and from the reflections. This is a great way to begin engaging students in manageable chunks so that kids can get exactly what it is that they're needing as they're going through remediation processes such as reteach and practice activities. When students receive their practice activities for intervention or enrichment, based on how they performed and how they've grouped, each practice activity, it might be best if they were slightly different or even just a teacher-led activity. Then reflect on and ask yourself, are the kids actually doing these activities and are the students showing growth? Finally, students are given a retest of some kind to demonstrate their growth and hopefully show that they've mastered the skills from the assessment. If they haven't mastered it, perhaps the cycle starts again and you can try something different. Following each of these steps turns an assessment from a number in a spreadsheet into a journey of growth for the student. Now, I'd like to get a little feedback from the chat, and I'd like to get your input on this actual statement here. Using a variety of different methods of assessment gives a more accurate view of student mastery. Do you agree, disagree, or are you undecided? I've got a couple of agrees coming in. A few more. I've got one depends. Several agrees. It looks like we're all pretty much on the same page. It definitely, I get the sense from the crowd that we all agree that a variety of different methods of assessment gives us the most accurate view of student mastery. And of course, that depends. I'd like to dive into that a little bit more, but it may be accurate because it kind of depends on what you're evaluating, right? Um, Ooh, I like Julietta's response there. We want to be information rich. We do not want to be information rich and knowledge poor. So yeah, the execution and use of different methods of assessment, it really depends on what you're trying to do. That's a great piece of feedback there. So keep in mind that a feedback cycle isn't only for your standard assessments. There are a variety of assessment types that are essential for checking and monitoring student progress. Within the platform in Aware, there are rubrics and there are student inventories, and premium customers even get access to post-assessment activities like reflection and retest. We mentioned before that reteach and practice activities need to be varied for students based on their needs. Post-assessment activities allows teachers to gather that feedback in our online testing platform from the students where they can quickly evaluate things in single test analysis. So leverage everything, every type of assessment, formative, summative, and otherwise in the classroom to help build a tapestry of information that can be used to help a student grow academically over time. Okay, so we've talked about at a really high level about the assessment program and evaluating it with a group of people, stakeholders you trust. We asked some of the key questions and made sure that we're going to try to get the information we need to embed and make sure that we're on the right track. We talked about the feedback cycle. Now let's talk a little bit about assessment writing as a whole. Any assessment program is only going to be as strong as the assessments that are written for the students to actually do the evaluation of the learning. So when looking at your assessment program as a whole, understanding how test types work in the Aware platform is a good next step to ensuring the appropriate tests are being delivered at the correct levels. In Eduphoria, you have local test types that you have full control over and built-in test types that are for importing data purposes. Check out our online help guides for importing data assistance and getting a full list of what we support. But for local assessments, we have district and campus level standard test types. Before configuring them, have a conversation with those stakeholders that we mentioned before about the various kinds of assessments that you want to deliver and their purpose. What are the goals for each of your test types? Are you delivering benchmarks? Do you have district common formative assessments? Do you have campus common formative assessments? In general, each test type serves as a way to organize your data and can be configured to allow, basically, you can allow who you want to see the data. Looking at the various settings in the bottom picture on the screen, you can see that you can limit a test type for district level testing only, campus level testing only, or allow it for both. We also see that data can be restricted so that teachers cannot see the data until you want them to see it. That setting can be particularly helpful when engaging in something like a pre-test or post-test system for student growth calculations for something like the teacher incentive allotment. So if you're going to do something like that, as an example, it's good to talk about what are your district policies on the data and visibility of those assessments. The view options allow you to configure and change them when you deem fit for district level assessments or other levels. If you're an Aware Premium district, this is also where you can control whether various test types are available for teachers in post-assessment activities as retests or reflections. I'm going to hit a little bit more on that later. And as a general note, try to restrict the number of test types that you have in your district to only the essential ones. When using the author space or quick views in Aware, it can become cumbersome to have a really large number of test types that you have to juggle in order to find the data you're actually looking for. Also, new in the last several weeks, we've introduced the ability to restrict reopening assessments at the test level. If you haven't found that setting already, in any of your district level tests, you can go into the Administration Settings tab and activate the setting that restricts a teacher's ability to reopen an assessment. I caution you in using this setting, however. It's typically best practice to let teachers control these kinds of things. Turning this on for too many tests can introduce a flood of emails and calls asking a district eduphorian or curriculum manager to try to reopen assessments for them because something weird happens in the classroom, like the student hit submit on question 2 on accident. So don't open yourself up to a lot of frustration by turning that setting on for all tests, but that setting might be helpful for something like your teacher incentive allotment tests that require more restrictions. Proceed with caution.
Jeremy, there was a quick question for you.
Yes.
Does allowing teachers to view the test on the previous screen allow them to edit the test? It's a good question.
But that is an excellent question. So that this really only controls who can see the data for the assessments, not necessarily who can edit the assessments at the teacher level. Rights tend to control who gets to edit the assessments. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Armando.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. Thank you.
All right. Now that we've gotten the chance to explore test types, what are you going to need in order to prepare for the creation of your assessments? Here we have a list of some of the essentials. Again, none of these are provided by Eduphoria, but these are often provided by curriculum resources that have been purchased by your district or even provided by your state education agency. Some of the most critical for designing assessments include your vertical alignment documents, your essential standards, test blueprints, and your assessment coverage maps or calendars. Vertical alignment documents show how the standards within core content relate to each other from grade level to grade level. These are especially helpful when trying to identify potential learning gaps and how they might play into future or current learning. In Aware, you can compare your vertical alignment documents to some historical and current data in custom-built data views across years. As an example, I've got an image here that shows that maybe you've looked at your vertical alignment document and you noted that the first unit of 6th grade math has a lot of connections to the first unit of 7th grade math. I can load the 6th grade data for Unit 1 with the 7th grade math for that next year and look at a year-to-year comparison to see what kind of learning gaps exist by the standards on each assessment. Further, the vertical alignment documents can help you decide which standards should be more heavily emphasized in your assessments. Your essential standards are an important resource that are likely identified by your district through a couple of different ways, either purchased or even identified at the district level. Here's an example. If we address the reality, there are likely way too many standards in a year to cover them all well. Some contents are worse than others, but it's a pretty universal truth. Which standards are the most critical for success in the next year, the next unit, and beyond that are the ones we really want to try to identify so that we can get the most bang for our buck. So which standards are the most frequently assessed? Which standards are identified by the state as most critical? Bridgeport ISD's Dr. Amy Ellis actually showed us an example of Bridgeport ISD's essential standard documentation when she presented for us a little while back, and this is an example. Their process was to look at longitudinal data and compare that to the vertical alignment and state curriculum documents to identify which standards are the most important for student success from one year to the next in their district. The standards that were most important were more heavily emphasized in instruction and assessment after they had been identified and shared with the teachers. Similarly, if you haven't had those kinds of conversations in your district, consider starting that conversation soon. Which standards are more important? Which standards do you struggle with that most across the district? Which standards are most critical for student success in the future? Keep in mind one key principle. None of the standards are critical if all of them are critical. Next, you're going to want to try to create or find test blueprints. Test blueprints try to answer the question, what percentage or coverage of your assessment should cover which standards? Every unit of study has a set of standards. A typical blueprint may emphasize the essential standards at covering 60 to 70% of the test, and then the less essential covering 30 to 40% of the test. Example blueprints are available from TEA resources, but aren't necessarily the only blueprint you should follow. Sometimes local needs supersede the state test's basic structure. You can feel free to use those from the state, but using them as a template so that you can modify them to your own needs can provide the flexibility your district may require when implementing or refining an assessment program. Each content, the needs of each group of students is slightly different from year to year, so maybe readdress these from year to year as needed. Make sure that the blueprint matches the needs of your students and teachers and not just a state assessment program. Though I get the reality of it, the state test is what it is and it has the power that it has. So navigate that as best as you can. Lastly, create your assessment coverage calendars. You now know which standards are related to each other through your vertical alignment documents, which standards are most essential, and what the basic structure of the test should look like with the blueprint. Use everything that you've uncovered or built up to this point to create your assessment calendar to ensure three things. One, the students have enough time to teach, schools have enough time to teach the most critical standards and at least touch on the less critical ones. Two, you get the time to cover the full breadth of the expected curriculum from the state standards. And three, you conclude while taking into account the various district holidays, breaks, and professional development while making your calendar. All right, now let's talk about the various assessment types that can be found in Aware. We've talked about making a plan. We've talked about all the steps you need to go through the feedback cycle and actually look at various resources to help you prepare for authoring the assessments. We offer a lot of options in Aware, including creating your own from scratch tests or loading items from an item bank, assuming that you've purchased them. Or recently, we've added pre-built assessments, which come from a few different item banks that we offer through Region 10. If you have questions about pre-built assessments and haven't seen them yet, reach out to sales@eduforia.net and they can talk to you about those. We'll go over some of the key principles with standard type assessments here in a few minutes to help ensure that you're getting the most bang for your buck and not only delivering your assessments, but also getting the most valid and reliable data you can from your assessments. I'm going to start first by hitting teacher tests and team tests before we get into some of the other test types. As we all know, teachers know what's going on in their classrooms better than pretty much anyone else. Within Aware, we allow teachers to create what we call teacher tests and team tests. Teacher tests are for the teachers to use in their everyday assessment purposes. Teachers create maybe a unit test of their own, a formative test quick check, whatever suits their needs so that they can make it so that they can assess what they're needing to in Aware's author platform for the students that are actually rostered in their class. The data for these assessments are available to the teachers in quick views, but not to others. Team tests take this up a notch. A teacher test can be easily converted into a team test, where then multiple teachers can see and deliver a joint assessment. Team tests are restricted to the people actually on the team, and teams are created in the Aware interface. If you're not familiar with where that is, I'm just going to show you real fast. In the left navigation, I believe, is it? There we go. Next to assessments under the gear, you can create a new team or edit teams, and this is going to be really powerful when creating those team tests. So as I said, only teachers on the team are going to be able to utilize that team test. They'll be able to edit the test, add questions, and play with the test settings, but also campus level administrators will now be able to see the data from those assessments, whereas teacher tests, the data was only available to the teachers. Use these two test types in situations where you're needing to just check your students' progress on the content for maybe the day's lesson or the week's lessons. Use the team test to give common assessments across grade levels. These can be helpful for PLC conversations where you're trying to identify common gaps and common strengths. Avoid teacher or team tests when asking teachers to deliver assessments that need to be created and controlled by the district or campus administration. Campus and district level assessments are created by administrators and are controlled by administrators. These are really helpful for assessments controlled by the assessment program as a whole, whereas teacher tests and team tests are truly for the day-to-day assessments that need to be controlled by the teacher. When using teachers tests and team tests, the possibilities are truly endless, but make sure the right tests are being given at the right levels. Let's talk about rubric assessments. Rubric assessments are also possible and Aware across a variety of test types, including district testing and teacher testing. Rubric assessments are handy for inputting scores on things that require a little more flexibility than just right or wrong type assessment questions, such as a writing composition, student projects, or student performance. If you have a lead forward license, there are actually lead forward templates available, and they're really handy. In the rubric authoring space, you can add as many levels or columns, or as many rows and columns as you want to the rubric to make it as simple or as complex as is needed, and you can evaluate those in quick views. The last major assessment type offered is a student inventory. Student inventories are great for tasks that are checklist style in nature, such as doing an alphabet acquisition check or counting check or checking reading fluency. Like a standard or rubric assessment, these can be analyzed in quick views or in the student profile or to monitor student progress over time. Connecting back to our feedback cycle for a moment, we talked about the importance of assessing students, then analyzing the data from those assessments. But how can Aware help with the student reflection and reassessment portion of that cycle? If you're an Aware Premium customer, you have access to post-assessment activities, which offer two additional assessment types, reflection and retests. After you've given an assessment, the teacher is able to create a reflection activity that students can access in their online testing platform. These reflections are linked to assessments that they've already completed and are linked to the score summary window for the students. We'll cover that a little more here in a minute. But as long as the window for the score summary is open, teachers can create multiple choice or open response type questions to ask students to reflect on their learning after the test is complete. The students can then set a goal for correcting their learning gaps or communicating their learning needs to the teacher. Reflection responses can be checked in single test analysis, which is, again, another premium feature, to gather that feedback and use it to build student groups for remediation and enrichment. After you've had the students reflect and you've done a little bit of reteach, if you'd like to give students an opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge again, the retest feature in Aware Premium offers teachers the chance to build the retest using the original test as a blueprint. Retest references the original test's content and rigor, then combs through any item bank that has been designated for teacher tests to find similar items. This creates a test that has a very similar feel and covers the same content without giving the students the exact same questions that they saw before. This can save the teacher a ton of time, assuming the item banks are available and similar items can be found. If the items can't be found, the retest questions are still fully customizable. Another big benefit of the retest is that the test is essentially a brand new teacher test. All of the data from a retest is kept separate from the original test, so the retest opportunity can be given without overwriting the district level data. It's also worth noting within retests, there's a practice point that I'm going to hit on a little bit later, but I might as well hit on it now for a moment as well. Depth of knowledge, you'll notice in the picture, complexity, which is where depth of knowledge is, and the standards have asterisks next to their columns because those are required when building a retest. If you're building a retest off an assessment that has no depth of knowledge set for each of the questions, retest will not be, they won't go find items because all items in item banks from our vendors have depth of knowledge attached to them. So in order for retest to work effectively, you need to set a depth of knowledge if one is not already set. So I want to just throw that out there if you're thinking about diving into retest and you haven't yet. Phew, okay. We've done a ton of exploration so far on really how to review or build your assessment program. And we've talked about what Aware offers to allow a variety of assessment opportunities for your students. Let's dig into the nitty-gritty of actual item writing for your assessments. The first important step is to ensure that your items match the rigor of the question being asked. You need to check through the standards and record the verbs. Then next to those verbs, record the nouns and the content so that you know exactly what it is the student should accomplish with the standard and at what level. The depth of knowledge here is really critical. Typically, the depth of knowledge will come in at level 1, 2, or 3. Now, there are a ton of resources all over the internet about depth of knowledge, so I'm not going to go terribly deep into that right now. But in general, depth of knowledge level 1, students are recalling the data. That's low-level blooms. Depth of knowledge level 2, students are analyzing information. They're not analyzing, they're applying that information. We're talking mid-level blooms. DOK level 3, students are analyzing, so higher level blooms. There is technically a DOK level 4, but typically DOK 4 type questions can't be asked at a standard with a standard type of assessment and requires some sort of performance check, perhaps needing to be assessed with a rubric. So our system supports DOK 1, 2, and 3. Now, before you start writing the item, examine the types of items available for the questions that you have potentially stacked up and ask yourself, what type of task should the student be engaging in to demonstrate mastery? We offer all of the major technology enhanced items that STAR offers, so you may need to pick something like an inline choice, a hotspot, or a drag and drop to craft your item instead of a standard multiple choice. Now, before we get into all of the different types of items we have, let me give you an example of how the standard and the depth of knowledge are really linked and are important on what it is that you're assessing. Reviewing the standard to the side here, we can see that students are to describe and illustrate the continuous movement of water above and on the Earth's surface of the Earth through the water cycle and explain the role of the sun as a major source of energy in the process. Then the question says, select one hotspot that serves as the energy source for the water cycle. Well, some of the key verbs from the standard are describe and explain. Are we accomplishing that in the question? Yes, the question is hitting the content, but it's not hitting the rigor. We could argue that describe and explain are DOK level 2, where the kids are having to at least apply what they know. Whereas this question is really at the recall level, at DOK level 1, where they're just identifying something they probably learned in class just through conversation or presentation. So we have to ask ourselves, is this an appropriate question to demonstrate mastery of the content? We could say that this actually is an appropriate question for the content, but you can't demonstrate mastery with it. If you have an assessment that's scaffolded, this is a perfectly fair question, but I can't base my analysis on this question alone because it's at DOK 1 and the kids need to demonstrate understanding at DOK 2. So don't scrap the question necessarily, but consider writing more questions at DOK2 so that you can get a really rich understanding of if the kids are understanding the content at the level they need to be demonstrating that understanding. Here's just a quick snapshot of all the different item types that we have. You can see we have 13 different item types. It looks like 15, but we have 12 independent item types across the top 2 rows. And then we have multi-part items. And multi-part items are their own type of item. So there's 13. And then multi-part items support combinations of multiple choice, multiple selection, or constructed response. So you can access our online help guide for more information on how to build each of these item types. But remember, sometimes the content and rigor combination require that the question be a different item type than just a standard multiple choice. Think about how best to assess the content for the question that's being asked and apply something like a hotspot, drag and drop, or inline choice to assessment content in unique ways that increase the expectations for student performance. Okay, quick recap. We've talked about creating your assessment or reviewing your assessment program. We've dug into the standards to identify the kind of items that we need to craft. We've written some items. Don't forget all of the item settings that need to be tied to the question as you author them. It's difficult to analyze items without a primary and a secondary standard. The secondary standard is totally optional. Technically, both of them are optional. You don't have to set one to give the test, but the primary standard is absolutely critical to item analysis. You have to choose a scoring method as well. So again, it defaults to 1, but you can alter that a little bit. Let's pretend for a moment that you have like a depth of knowledge level 2 question on a multi-select question that's points per task. It could potentially be worth 3 or more points for that multiple selection or even a match table grid question. Maybe that's acceptable if you have a very short assessment where you need a little more granularity and variety in the points. Or maybe it's a longer assessment and you want it to be a partial credit where instead of 3, 4, or even 5 points for the one question, it's up to worth 2 points. Or you can just flat set it at correct or incorrect. They'll typically default to correct or incorrect, but you have a lot more granularity with the scoring method on the top right with a question. So explore those and play with those to make sure the items have the correct, not only scoring method, but also weight and depth of knowledge tied to them so that you can get into the analysis in a very meaningful way. All right, we've gone through the journey for establishing your system. We've talked about setting up your test types, writing items, rigor, and the standards. Now let's go through our experience with test settings. What all can and should you do to help make sure that the testing experience is as balanced as it can be for all of your students? Let's talk about online test settings first. When each of these settings is active, these are automatically available for every student taking the assessment, thus test level accommodations or settings. For example, if you turn on the calculator in these test settings here, every student will have the ability to use the calculator. The calculator is also, however, one of those settings that is settable at the student-specific level in the student profile. We're going to talk about that here in just a minute. But as a quick note, the accommodations in the student profile will be active for students regardless of the test settings that we're showing here on this page. A few other test type settings that we have here include spelling assistance, allowing students to view their responses with the student score summary. The scratch pad, which I want to stop on for just a second, the scratch pad is relatively new within the last year or so, and is very highly underutilized. It's a great thing that allows kids to get basically graph paper in front of them in their online testing platform that they can use. The graphing paper can be moved to just blank white paper where they can sketch things out if they need to, or maybe engage with potentially some sort of testing strategy. Note on the scratch pad though, any of the work that the kids do in the scratch pad is not saved from test session to test session. We also have the line reader, the question randomization, and enabling lockdown browser. Quick note about the lockdown browser. There are help articles linked here under the lockdown browser toggle. So in the user interface, and I've also included a link at the bottom of this slide. Be sure to check out those help articles, as there's further steps that must be taken in order for the lockdown browser to truly function. It won't just lock down the student's browser with this setting alone. Students will need to use the lockdown browser app on their device or the lockdown browser extension in the Chrome internet browser. Be sure to check out those help articles to make sure you're using them all the best way you can. New in the last month or two, I mentioned this a second ago, was the ability to prevent tests from being reopened at the as a test level setting. This is mostly useful, like I said, for district level assessments that require that extra layer of security, so use with caution. You may also notice that there's an option to enable student confidence. Student confidence is a aware premium only setting that allows students to enter their level of confidence on the question at a low level, middle level, or high level of confidence. That can be really great in getting an extra stratified layer of information about, does my students' confidence in their questions match how well they did, or is there a mismatch? That can have some big impacts on how you analyze the data. Test windows, we'll hit those real fast. They're a great feature to apply to your assessments, but they can sometimes shoot you in the foot too if you're not using them quite right. This feature can enhance test security within the district, especially when there's a tight schedule needed for things like pre-test and post-tests. But I want to caution everyone onto really holding on to that idea of super control in the windows with soft hands. Remember, all students are different. Some classrooms need different amounts of time for various content, but you're also responsible for making sure things get covered. So there's a careful balance you have to go through here. Use your windows sparingly when possible, or keep them wide enough to allow for flexibility when needed, and communicate with your teachers so that if they're falling behind, you have a plan, or they have a plan to strategy to make up that time somewhere else. When authoring your tests in the summer, I know many of you do that. I know we're past summer, but keep in mind, if you have some that are from the summer and haven't opened yet, make sure your windows open on or after the first day of your instructional calendar. Having the opening date prior to the first day of the school year can push your data out of the current school year and into last year's school year on accident. So due to the nature of teacher tests, it's worth noting too that teacher tests don't have windows. They're always open. So teachers control your tests visibility with the status, active, pending, or archived. Also, ensure that the correct students are selected when authoring your assessments. In student selection, you can see each course at the campus assigned to the subject that's been chosen for the test. Be careful with the course numbers, as some individual schools can assign different course names and course codes to the exact same type of grade level and content combo. As an example, Aware helped my former district identify across all elementary schools the need to align on how we named fifth grade science as an example. Across all 5 campuses, we had 5 different fifth grade sciences we had to check and make sure were checked because we named them or used a slightly different number. Aware can help you pinpoint here when in the author area where you might be able to clean up some of your course codes and names. A little further down on this exact same screen, not included in the screenshot, are additional filters by student program, student form, or monitor group. We highly recommend using the course level filters as your starting point, as they provide you the most flexibility for making tests visible and available for testing. This is a quick preview of, while students are actively taking the test, what students might see in their toolbar. So those settings we were talking about before, you can see up at the top, there's things like content clarifiers, text-to-speech, the online dictionary, and the online ruler, reference documents as needed, and the student score summary. Pardon me. The student score summary can be especially powerful as it has its own window separate from the administration window. While active, students would be able to log in and revisit their assessment to see what their answers were and what the right answers are, and then generally just review the test. Teachers that like to go over the assessment with their students can use this setting to do so without having to necessarily print up a bunch of test packets or answer strips. After that, we have accessibility tools. These include things like Zoom, color contrast, highlighter, notepad, question flagging, answer elimination, a Spanish interface if needed, and the question guide. Each of these things can be really helpful for kids that need various accommodations. One of the pitfalls we see in some assessment programs is a general lack of understanding from the student side on what these things are and how to use them. Familiarize yourself with them, make sure the teachers understand how they're used, and give the students an opportunity to actually explore these things in a low stress environment, maybe on like a practice test, so that they can become familiar with how to use these things without the stress of worrying about a score. Quick recap. We have the test level supports we've talked about, calculator, lockdown browser, line reader. We didn't mention that one before. That one's a relatively new tool where the students can use the line reader to isolate one line at a time for reading. Spelling assessments, the scratch pad, question randomization, online dictionary, and the ability to review the submitted responses with the score summary. With that, I promised we would talk about student-specific supports. The student-specific reports are text-to-speech, content clarifiers, Spanish, calculator, spelling assistance, and speech-to-text. If these things are on in the student profile, they are available to the students no matter what the test level support settings are set to. So if you have a student with accommodations in their IEP for text-to-speech support, make sure it's on in the student profile and it will always be available to them, similar with all the rest of those supports. To really get to conduct a pulse check on your student level supports across the entire district, start by running a student support report to figure out what's actually on for my students right now. It's easy to run one of these in Aware using the reports button under analysis in the new navigation. It'll be one of the last reports, so scroll all the way down, but also keep in mind that this report is only available for roles that are typically considered administrative. When running the report, select the desired campus or just run it for the entire district. You'll get a list of individual students down on the left side of the report. You can kind of see that in the image, and then a list of every single available accommodation across the top. Now, there's a whole bunch of accommodations listed, so it might be helpful to run this as an Excel document so that you don't have to pull out like, something super squished and you have to zoom in or pull out the magnifying glass to read it. The PDF option is available if you absolutely need it, but highly recommend using the Excel. And then when looking at it, the cells will either be populated with a 1 for the support is on or a 0 for the support is off. Running this report gives you a really great baseline so you can decide, are the kids that need these supports actually getting them in their assessments? If they aren't, you can address that. If they are, you can move on to another step in the assessment review process. If they aren't on, you have a couple of options to get them turned on. One way is to mass import them, similar to the way like a test hound export might work into our system. Another way is to do it manually in the student profiles, which can only be done with someone with the appropriate right to manage those student supports. So make sure those are on for your kiddos. We've mentioned the score summary just a couple of times. I wanted to show it to you real fast. In the settings, it's under the test settings. You can actually turn on the flag that says enable students to review their submitted responses. Notice there's a window under that. That window is independent of the testing window. So if the testing window is set to close 3 days ago, you can have the score summary window to open 2 days ago and remain open for another week. That's really helpful so that you can get all of your kids tested, but still afford them the opportunity to review their test in the score summary. When the kids jump in, the second screenshot there shows just what the kids see at first when they get into it. So they can see at a glance which questions they got correct, which ones they got incorrect. And then when they click review all answers, they're given the opportunity to go through question by question as if the tests were actually live without the ability to change any of their responses. Now, if you don't have the time and resources to really deal with content clarifiers, I wanted to highlight this tip. Content clarifiers are a student support that can be really, really beneficial, but they can also be extremely time consuming to set up and give students an opportunity to practice them. So if you're strapped and you need students to practice at least a few times before they get into a real testing environment, you can actually use the release star test from 23 and 24 that include content clarifiers. You can go to pre-built tests, apply the filters you need to find the test you're looking for, choose the star release test, use the actions button to copy the test, and then from there, you can whittle the questions down to just the ones you need for the content that you've recently learned, or use the entire thing for something like a benchmark, but it will include all of the content clarifiers that were from the STAR test without you having to build content clarifiers yourself in your local assessments. All right, we're nearing the home stretch. Let's talk about administration and proctoring. As a quick hit, after the tests are made and the students are ready to take the test, we have to talk about administering the test at least very briefly. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but I want to talk about the essentials. Teachers can start the test for the selected students, maybe a student who is absent if it needs to be individual, or all students in an entire class period, and then start and stop them for each student that they have checked. You'll get a status that lets you know when this test is available or unavailable for the kids. And you'll notice also you get supports and then there's notes. In the screenshot, you see a notes example. Notes are a really powerful thing in the test. So students are taking the notes. In this interface is where the teacher can actually review those notes. You can click there where it says 2 notes. You can see those notes and review them. Then you also get the status, which will show the kids either in progress, graded, or completed. Graded and completed are slightly different statuses. If you have a constructed response in your assessment, completed means the kid has hit submit and all of the answers are in, but it might not show graded until the teacher's gone in and actually graded the constructed response. If there are no constructed response in your assessment, you'll never hit completed and you'll go straight to graded because anything that can be automatically graded will be automatically graded. You also see here the ability just to talk about the student supports a little more in depth. Teachers, if they're going through a process where they have an ARD coming up and you need to document whether or not particular supports have been helpful when they're being used, if a test has the settings set to manage student supports at the district or campus level, the teacher can go into the administration space and actually turn some student supports on for that student and then document whether or not it was helpful for that student outside of our system as the documentation or potentially through a student form in our system. But this is where you can actually accomplish that and control that at the teacher level. All right, put a little bow on it. We talked at a very high level about reviewing your assessment program. We talked about really identifying what you want to accomplish with test types. We talked about the process of using resources like vertical alignment documents, test blueprints, calendars to begin outlining and framing your assessment program. We talked about everything it takes to build an assessment, including content review, TEKS review, item writing, selecting the right item types, and then we talked about student supports. There's a whole lot going on when it comes to creating and crafting valid and reliable assessments and having a solid assessment program. No matter where you're at in this process, maybe you're well established already and all you're doing is reviewing it and just doing a spot check to make sure we're still solid, or maybe you're starting from the ground up. Now is a perfect time to engage in this process because even if there are a lot of changes that need to be made or a small number of tweaks, it's never too late to begin that process and make sure kids are getting everything that they need. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Armando.
All right, Jeremy, great job. We had some questions that came up. Some of them are feature requests. We do encourage you all, if you have not submitted that as a feature request, to go ahead and do so. And we will go ahead and send it up to the feature request portal that we have, and someone will be reviewing those as well. Just as an FYI, this presentation will be provided to you all in the follow-up email. We were excited to bring this first webinar in the series called Purpose-Driven Assessment, Enhanced Learning Through Assessment Design. If you need additional assistance on this or for other topics, please email training@eduphoria.net.
And Armando, before we jump to the next slide, you mentioned feature requests. Please, please, please always submit those. The new feature to block reopen on some teacher assessments was from feedback through feature requests. So we do look at those and we try to use them as often as we can.
That's 100% correct, Jeremy. Thank you. We want to remind you to visit our teacher learning site for Aware and Strive at teachers.eduphoria.net. Within the teacher site, you will find modules made up of video, text learning resources, supports, knowledge checks, and discussion prompts. The length of the video content ranges from a couple of minutes to about 6 minutes, where teachers can get topic-specific demonstrations on utilizing Aware or Strive. If you are interested in course challenges for teachers to show what they know, fill out the interest form and we will get back to you. On behalf of today's team and all of Eduphoria, we would like to thank you for joining us on today's webinar about purpose-driven assessment, enhanced learning through assessment design. Have a great day.